Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have former Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano, with us today. We'll chat with her in just a second, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. All right, let's get to the big things of the week. Day 24 of the shutdown, kids. No end in sight.
I don't think there is an end in sight. I think Trump is perfectly happy never to reopen government again, and apparently Mike Johnson feels the same way.
Yeah. Well, the polls continue to come out. Americans are blaming Republicans for this. Not a good thing for Republicans. This morning, the new inflation numbers came out. We're now back at 3%. Inflation continues to climb. Trump is still up in the middle of the night imposing new tariffs, this time on Canada. We're stopping the negotiations, but the tariff situation is still a mess. But here's the thing that I'm really starting to get a little concerned about. The stock market just doesn't seem to give a shit about anything. Shutdown, tariffs, inflation, chaos, nothing matters.
They like the ballroom.
I want to pull up something that I saw the other day. This was kind of scary because stock prices are at a high. Okay, so if you look at the major stock crashes in 1929, the PE ratio was 33. The dot-com bubble, 44. The global financial crisis, 28. Currently, 39. We are at near historic levels. And also, what's interesting is that retail investing, mom and pop Main Street, it's euphoric. When that shit starts to happen, that is the time to get out. And so if we keep hitting record levels, the market is so frothy and it's making a lot of people worry and question, are we in another bubble? And when there are bubbles, the market drops more towards the 30 and 40% levels. And so I hope people are paying attention to this stuff, because when you have a shutdown that's now going on a month, and you have rising inflation and cratering job growth and more tariff uncertainty and troops on the streets and all kinds of just chaos all around us, and the stock market just shrugs it off and is like, hey baby, there's only one direction, and that is up. I think we might have a problem soon.
Yeah, I think we have this very strange economy where 10% of the population, the top 10%, is contributing to almost all the consumer spending, and the bottom 90% is not. And that's really unusual and has never happened before. And then we all know about the potential AI bubble, which everyone is pointing to. The Moody's economist says that 22 states are already in recession.
Yeah. Well, other news that came out on this subject is that corporations, which have so far been eating most of the tariffs,
they're done.
They're done. And the consumer is going to be feeling this impact very soon. And so when you have inflation going up, and now it's going to probably go up even further over the next several months around holiday time, because corporations big like Walmart to the very small ones, they can't continue to eat this. And it's a subject that's of grave concern, because I don't think our government is capable of handling a financial crisis of the magnitude that we've seen in the past.
Wait, are you talking about us or Argentina?
Oh,
because I know they can help with Argentina.
They'll be fine, because they have $40 billion they didn't have before.
But another thing that happened, though, the warning signs are already here. Another car financing company, I think this is the third or fourth one, went belly up last week. And that's an indication that people are not able to pay their cars off.
There's a lot of
They've stopped paying.
There's a lot of warning signs. How do you guys feel about how we don't have an East Wing anymore?
Well, I'm looking forward to the dictator chic ballroom.
The Saddam Hussein special?
Yeah. More gold, the better.
Imagine the tours that are going to be going on like in 26, like the White House tour is like, this is the Saddam Hussein room.
Yeah. No, but in all seriousness, also, I mean, aside from the insanity of all this, the East Wing is where the First Lady had her offices.
Wait, what is Melania Trump going to do now?
Exactly. But I'm not even talking about this First Lady. I mean,
where will she do all that important work?
Be better, Donald.
But
But you know what? The tour, this is what the tour is going to be like next year. Seriously. This will seriously be a tour. Okay. This used to be the East Wing. This used to be the Rose Garden. This used to be, it's going to be about where everything used to be. There might not even be a White House anymore.
that won't be next year's tour. That might be in 3-year tour. But next year's tour is going to be, look at the gold. It's the best gold you've ever seen in your life.
The craziest thing happened yesterday. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt's
Yes. No.
a little press conference. The reporter was like, could Donald Trump tear down the White House and the Jefferson Memorial? And she basically said, yeah. Think about that for a second. He just thinks he could fucking knock down anything.
But here's a question for everyone here. What should a potential, if we ever have another election, future Democrat do with that giant monstrosity?
Homeless shelter.
That's what I thought. But
Yeah.
I was thinking a greenhouse.
No.
You don't want to grow vegetables
Okay.
and things like
This is what-
live things again.
This is what I thought the New York City should have done after 9/11. You build the fucking Twin Towers back exactly the way they were.
I'm not against him tearing it down and
Knock that ballroom down. Build back the exact replica of the
FDR's part of it.
But I guarantee you, every fucking Republican's going to be like, look how wasteful the Democrats
they'd
are.
never
Look
let
what
it
they're
happen.
doing.
They-
Look what
they-
they're doing with your hard-earned tax money.
assuming-
And you know what? President AOC will be like, fuck you, okay? That's my
so.
response to that. But I love listening to Republicans. It's almost become entertainment. Like a CNN or MSNBC reporter will interview a Republican congressperson. And it's like, lots of presidents have done renovations. This ain't no fucking renovation. He tore down the entire East Wing. He paved over the Rose Garden. That's not a renovation. That's an assault on a landmark.
The true assault is when this monstrosity is put up with the huge Palladian windows. It's going to look like a mall.
First of all, why does a man who has no friends need a ballroom for parties? Right?
Well, what kind of parties?
He's got no friends.
They're going to be military parties.
He have no military parties. He's going to be his sycophants from Florida who are going to fly over and pay him a fuckload of money to
think
dance at the
both.
White
Both.
House.
Both.
All he's doing is building Mar-a-Lago North.
Yeah, that's what he's doing.
That's for sure. But this is in the tradition of autocrats. They like to build something that's filled with gold, that's ugly, out of scale, and it's a statement. It's a statement of power, and it's saying, I'm in charge. Yes. I can do whatever I want.
But it's also, I agree with that, but it's also just a giant fuck you.
Well, it's just like everything else he's doing to our democracy.
Well, he's literally and figuratively destroying the White House.
1,000%.
You know, the other thing I want to mention is the Epstein scandal. Thankfully, he's back in the news. Not as much as I'd like, but Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir came out this week, and I'm going to talk about that in my rant because it is a bombshell. All right, let's get to our winners and losers.
My winner, Virginia Democrats, for their plans for a redistricting push to add a couple more congressional House seats to counter Republican states. My loser, U.S. cattle ranchers. Trump's Argentina impending beef deal will effectively quadruple the imports, which will dramatically affect U.S. farmers.
My loser is the Constitution. Under the current SCOTUS, according to the Brennan Center, the Trump administration has now won 90% of the cases in front of the Supreme Court in 2025, which is a sharp contrast to the win rate in federal district courts, which is closer to 40%. My winner is the polka dot dress lady, as the internet is calling her, for her courageous double-deuce stance against ICE agents during their performative raid in New York's Chinatown.
My winner, U.S. Attorney Kelly Hayes, who told Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche that she cannot find enough evidence to bring charges against Senator Adam Schiff. Of course, Trump will likely fire her soon, as he has others who said the same thing about the Tish James and James Comey cases. My loser, Speaker Mike Johnson, who continues to keep the House not in session because he wants to protect pedophiles. Because if he brings back the House, the first thing he's got to do is swear in Adelita Grijalvo from Arizona's 7th Congressional District, who won her special election a month ago. And then the first thing she's going to do is be the 218th vote to force a floor vote on releasing the full Epstein files. That's what this is all about. That's what this shutdown is about. Protecting pedophiles. Which brings me to the weekly rant. So I've been listening to Virginia Giuffre's just released bombshell posthumous memoir, Nobody's Girl. Virginia is the Epstein survivor who took her own life this past April. And as much as I thought I knew about this horrific scandal involving heinous acts of sex trafficking of minors, that knowledge is being dwarfed by what Virginia recounts in harrowing detail on page after page of this so very important book. I'm learning just how involved Ghislaine Maxwell was in the grooming, pimping, and sexual abuse of these underage girls like Virginia. I'm hearing the agonizing details of Maxwell's sexual torture and rape of Virginia, which proves she was not merely Epstein's glorified executive assistant, as she's claimed, which is why it is so fucking infuriating that Maxwell was afforded the gift by Donald Trump of a transfer from a maximum security prison to a cushy minimum security camp-like facility earlier this year. Worse, it is beyond unconscionable that this evil monster, this grotesque, sadistic, sex-trafficking rapist would be given any consideration whatsoever by Trump for a pardon. She is as disgusting, perverted, dangerous, and guilty as Epstein was. No different. She is Satan with tits and worthy of nothing but spending the rest of her miserably deranged life in the most awful prison, surrounded by the most hardened, terrifying convicts who have zero tolerance for child rapists. The other thing I'm learning are the specifics of how Epstein and Maxwell trafficked Virginia to his pedophile cohorts. These include billionaires, businessmen, politicians, academics, 70-year-old scientists, Prince Andrew, and a, quote, well-known prime minister whose savage rape left her bleeding from her mouth, her vagina, and her anus. That these savage pigs have been allowed to continue living their lives in peace and without accountability for their diabolical acts makes me want to puke. And lastly, shame the fuck on people like Speaker Mike Johnson and every other deplorable enabler in the Republican Party who are literally fighting to keep the Epstein files secret from the public. Files which, as we learn in Virginia's book, include names, dates, and most likely videos of these powerful men in very compromising positions with underage girls, which Epstein allegedly used for blackmail and extortion. Johnson, Republicans, and Trump's Justice Department know exactly what's in those files, and they don't care. Because they are complicit ghouls, engaged in a maddening cover-up, and they'd rather protect these brutal rapists than seek justice for the 1,000 survivors. How dare they? How fucking dare they? And what about Trump, who promised to bring down this despicable cabal of deep state pedophiles if he was put back in the White House and Congress given back to his party? Well, he now controls everything. He claims personal innocence, yet still refuses to order the release of the full Epstein files. The billion-dollar question is why? There is no logical answer, except perhaps one. I still have a ways to go in this book, and I'm listening to it on Audible. Hearing Virginia's harrowing tale in the spoken word actually makes it about 1,000 times worse and more disturbing than reading it. I am so shocked, repulsed, and angered just by what I've heard so far that it's hard to fathom how I'm going to make it through the rest of this book. But finish the book I will, because I believe it's important for all of us to know everything possible about this shocking tale of pure evil. Everyone should read this book. Speaker Johnson should read this book. Senate Majority Leader John Thune should read this book. It should be handed out to every fucking congressional Republican and right-wing TV host and podcaster. They should all read this book and then think about their daughters as they do so. Honestly, I don't know what kind of sick, twisted, cowardly world we live in anymore. Are we really going to be a nation with powerful people in Washington who have the ability to bring justice to those who committed these heinous crimes, yet instead choose not to because they're protecting either the United States president and or his rich, connected cronies who committed the unthinkable? Hopefully the truth will someday come out, and anyone who abused and tortured these underage girls, no matter who they are, no matter how wealthy and powerful they are, no matter which party they belong to, will find themselves in a courtroom answering to the survivors and the rule of law. Until then, we must never let this story die. We must redirect back to it from the daily barrage of distractions Trump throws at us, because this story has the potential to be the greatest scandal in world political history, and because the survivors deserve our attention, support, and commitment to justice and accountability. All right, let's get to Janet Napolitano. She's currently the founder and faculty director of the Institute for Security and Governance at UC Berkeley. In her distinguished career, she served as former Secretary of Homeland Security, President of the University of California, Governor of Arizona, Attorney General of Arizona, and U.S. Attorney for the District of Arizona. In 2022, President Biden appointed her to the President's Intelligence Advisory Board and also appointed her to the Intelligence Oversight Board. In 2024, she served on the independent review panel to investigate the attempted assassination of Donald Trump on July 13, 2024. She currently serves as a professor of public policy at the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley. Janet, welcome into the back room.
Thank you. Good to see you.
So there's so much I want to talk with you about, but I want to start off with just a couple of very topical things that are consuming much of the news cycle this week. Let's start with Trump's demand for $230 million in so-called damages over the Russiagate and classified documents investigations. I happen to believe this is noise. It's a lot of distraction away from the Epstein scandal, which seems to be his MO these days. But is this something that you think can and will likely happen?
I don't think so. I hope not. Otherwise, anybody who's ever been investigated is going to be filing claims. It's an interesting issue because if we had a real Justice Department that would contest that kind of a claim, it would put Trump to the proof to show that there was no basis for the investigations to begin with. And of course, there was substantial basis both for the insurrection investigation and the Mar-a-Lago classified documents investigation. So it would open up a real Pandora's box because then the government, if it were serious, like I said, if it were seriously acting as Justice Department, could put on. But I just think the politics of it. I saw even some Republican members of Congress yesterday were going, that doesn't sound good.
It doesn't sound good. It doesn't look good. It doesn't smell good. It is just bad. But I don't think he cares.
Here's my speculation was $230 million. First of all, I don't know where he came up with that number, but he would take the money and then put it into building his big, beautiful ballroom that he's destroyed the East Wing to construct.
Yeah, that was the next thing I was going to ask you about, because that has so many Americans up in arms. This 90,000 square foot ballroom. How is he allowed to do this without congressional or Supreme Court approval? I live in New York City. I can't replace my windows without landmark preservation approval. Yet he can knock down a major part of the White House and nothing. How is this possible?
He just blew through it all. I mean, he trumped it. There are two White House historical preservation commissions he's supposed to get approval from. He just ignored them, and one of them is filled with Trump fans anyway. But he just ignored the process, and then he's also supposed to go to Congress, and he didn't do that. He just did it, and now I saw in the media this morning that there's a couple from Virginia that has filed a lawsuit to stop it. But in the meantime, the East Wing's already demolished.
It's gone.
I mean, and here's the thing. the White House should be the people's house. It's not.
Well, it
Trump's
always
house.
was.
It is the people's house, and the president is a temporary occupant. And so, but I think he thinks it's an extension of Mar-a-Lago. I mean, he
Sure.
paved over the Rose Garden. He, like we've all seen, he just tore down the entire East Wing without telling anybody. I mean, with kind of misstating what he was planning to do.
Well, he lied about what he was going to do. He said, I'm not going to touch it, And of course, like everything else, it turned out to be a lie. But, I was thinking about it this morning because I'm always trying to understand him. I try to get in his head, because if we try to understand and analyze Donald Trump and explain his actions and words through the lens of two normal people, sane people, we will go crazy. So you have to sort of be in his head. And I was just thinking, because you made this excellent point about him thinking that the White House is Mar-a-Lago. That's what we've seen for the last 10 years. Donald Trump used to sit in the corner office of his business. And when you sit in the corner office, you are the boss. When you say jump, everybody says how high. He then thought it would be a great idea to run for president, where there's co-equal branches of government, where if you say jump, people go, wait a minute, sir, we're equals. He's never been able to make that transition. So everything he does is as if he is still in the corner office. And I think you've made a very astute point that he's not in the corner office. He's in the White House, which is now Mar-a-Lago. It's Mar-a-Lago North.
Yeah. Here's the thing. And I think we'll probably get later on in the conversation about authoritarianism and all that. But, his treatment of the White House is so symbolic of his presidency. Because, first he, redecorated everything with this fake gold stuff. Then he messes around with the presidential portraits. He hides Obama's portrait. He puts up an auto pen instead of President Biden's portrait. It's like there's nothing too trivial that we can imagine that he doesn't want to put his stamp on. Even though he's president of the United States, he theoretically has more important things to resolve than the decoration and architecture of the White House. But it also sends a powerful message to the American people. It sends a powerful message to the American. Think about this: we're in the middle of a government shutdown.
Day 24.
Food stamps are going to run out in a bunch of states in another week. Healthcare insurance premiums, people are already getting their notices about the dramatic increases in those. Inflation hasn't gone down during his presidency and continues to percolate on at about 3%. So prices continue to rise. And people feel that. They feel that at the grocery store. They feel that in paying their utilities and their rent. And in the midst of all of this chaos, and you have hundreds of thousands of federal workers now furloughed. In the midst of all this chaos, what is he spending time on? Redoing the White House to build a ballroom.
Well, Caroline Levitt yesterday said that's his, quote, main priority. That's astounding, given what you just outlined.
Yeah. Well, his priority certainly hasn't been what's happening in domestically. I mean, he's spent a lot of time on Israel, Gaza, reached some initial success there, but now we're confronting Trump attention disorder, meaning that to really achieve lasting peace in the Middle East, you need a sustained, ongoing effort by the president, which he's always had a hard time sustaining that kind of an effort. You've got Ukraine. You've got a huge meeting with President Xi in China coming up. So he's doing a lot on the international front. I can't name one thing he's done for the American people at home.
No, it's all in service to his ego, his crippling insecurities. It's symbolic of his desire to mirror the behavior of the strong men throughout history who he admires, who build these big palaces filled with gold, and the people, the peons, look to these palaces as like, wow, look at that. Like, that's what he wants. It's so psychotic and pathological when you think about it, which is why it is complicated to just try to make any sense out of it. I have George Conway, the attorney, on here all the time, and the two of us just end up laughing, going, why does he do what he does? Because he's a sociopath. That's it. That's that's the answer. Let's stop analyzing. Why would Donald Trump say this today? Because he's a sociopath. Why would Donald Trump do this today? Because he's a sociopath. And so you're right. The people in this country are now suffering through this shutdown. We're on day 24. There's no end in sight. And he's playing around with the ballroom because that's what he does. The other thing I want to ask you about that's in the news recently is these continued bombings of these alleged drug boats. We blew up the 8th one. This one was in the Pacific this week, Tuesday, I believe. 8th in the last month, killing 2 more alleged, quote, narco-terrorists, bringing the total dead so far to 29, without any interdiction or evidence that innocent people aren't being murdered. Let me ask you this, as someone who ran the Department of Homeland Security, how does this make us any safer?
Well, it doesn't. And, these bombings, it's easy to say these are narco-terrorists and we're saving the lives of American people. I heard President Trump say something like 25,000 people a week or some other number. However, if you look at, let's take the boats that he bombed off the Atlantic coast. Those boats weren't headed to the United States. I mean, those were short-range vessels. They were probably going into the Caribbean or elsewhere to ship drugs to, assuming they were drug traffickers, to Europe or to West Africa. They were not boats that were even capable of reaching the United States. And I think probably the same is true of the boat in the Pacific. So just the targeting of these particular vessels is suspect. They've never released any information about why they thought these boats were particularly bad. They've never released information about why this wasn't left to the Coast Guard, which is the normal branch, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security that's interdicts drug boats and does a very good job at that. They've never explained the law. Let's assume the worst, that these were the drug kingpin narco heads, bringing drugs to the United States. By the way, these were mules. These are people who do the transportation are very low level in the drug world. We don't have the death penalty for that. Under American law, we don't have the death penalty for that. So he's kind of unilaterally, without a declaration of law, imposing the death penalty on suspect intelligence on these drug boats. Now, don't get me wrong. Drug trafficking is a real problem. Mm-hmm. I've dealt with it. I dealt with it as a federal prosecutor. I dealt with it as a border state governor. I dealt with it as secretary. Do not get me wrong. But this is very performative. It's not real, except for the people who were killed.
But you see, that's the part, to jump back to the word sociopath, which I don't throw around lightly. That's the part that should be so troubling if you just stop to think about what he's doing. He's like a teenager sitting in a room playing Grand Theft Auto. He is just murdering people without knowing whether there are mothers who have children at home or fathers who have children at home. It's astounding. The United States president is just blowing shit up and murdering people without giving the American people or Congress any proof, any logical reason or justification for these missions other than the lie, which, jumping back to Gaza for a second, which is no different than him now, despite all the facts on the ground, claiming he solved the 8th war.
I think you also have to think about it. Is this really about the drug war, or is it about regime change in Venezuela? And I think the Secretary of State Rubio is a longtime foe of Maduro's in Venezuela, and has a lot of knowledge about that area of the world. Rubio, he kind of specialized in that when he was in the Senate. We see press accounts that he's got CIA agents working in Venezuela. This could be part and parcel of that as an overall strategy. But we don't know, and we won't know. One thing we do know is that he's basically carrying out this drug war without going to Congress for any kind of briefing or for any kind of formal declaration.
So he's just operating unilaterally like he's the boss. Because in his mind, that's how he sees himself. But with Venezuela, and we talk about regime change, what we do know is that regime change never works. It never works.
Well,
so how does that make us safer?
Well, our previous experiences with regime change have not actually been very successful, as we've seen in numerous examples. What I'm trying to do is say, well, maybe there's a bigger strategy, a bigger global view than just blowing up a bunch of low-level drug boats.
I agree with you that might be their ultimate big geopolitical goal here, military goal. But that doesn't work. So no matter how you look at it, no matter how they try to justify it or spin it, it is probably the opposite of keeping us safe on so many levels, let alone what it does to the rule of law.
Well, I think, and now as a former Secretary of Homeland Security, a number of the actions of the administration, if anything, have made the country less safe. I'll give you one example. Cybersecurity. We live in a networked world. Our critical infrastructure, our electricity, our water, our dams, our hospitals, etc., all rely on cyber networks, telecommunications, all of it, and there's been increasing evidence of activity on there by adversaries, China, Russia, Iran, and the key U.S. agency that's to work on the cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure is in DHS. It's called CISA, the Critical Infrastructure Security Administration. And what have they done? They've reduced CISA by almost 50% and removed or fired almost all the people who were truly expert on some of these kinds of infiltrations. Why? Because among its remit, CISA also did election security. And going back to the controversy over 2020, he just can't get over it. Anything having to do with elections, bad. So all those people are gone. And that is leaving the United States and the people of the United States horribly exposed.
They're also diverting a lot of the resources of law enforcement, counterterrorism, the FBI, the Department of Justice, to immigration, which I want to ask you about. You oversaw major immigration enforcement and border initiatives during your time in office. How would you assess the current state of U.S. immigration policy under President Donald Trump?
Well, I'll break it into two parts. One, the southern border is, by any measure, more secure than it was.
Mm-hmm.
And actions they've taken on the southern border, although very expensive, have had a good impact. And so we give them the border. The challenge is, what do you do with the 10 or 11 million people already in the country who are here here illegally, who are undocumented? And there's a vast difference amongst those people. They're not all the same. Some have committed other serious crimes. They need to be apprehended and deported right away. That's what we focused on in the Obama administration. Some have just come over. They're new entrants, and so they have not yet formed any kind of community or family relations within the United States. I think those people are eligible for deportation. And then you have this big middle group of people who have been here, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. They have had children while they've been in the United States. They're working. They do a lot of work in areas that U.S. citizens really aren't willing to do. They pay taxes. And it's going after those people and trying to do a mass deportation of those people where I think we see all of the over aggressiveness on the part of ICE. And we also are beginning to see resistance on behalf of the American people. They're saying, well, we didn't vote for that. We wanted to get out those bad criminals. And I would add to that the brand new entrants. We didn't vote to knock off Carlos, who's been my gardener for 12 years. We didn't vote to get rid of Carmen, who's been cleaning my house for 10 years. We didn't vote to get out John and Mary's parents, who go to our school and are members of the PTA. That's not who we. That's and then in the context of this kind of trying to weed out everybody, they're picking up U.S. citizens, they're separating families, and they're doing these very dramatic surges using the National Guard and others in places like Chicago and Portland and Los Angeles. And that raises a whole nother set of questions about the exercise of presidential power. But does it make us safer? I think if you live in those communities, they'd say it's the opposite. It's raised tensions. It's got everybody on edge. And it's the opposite of kind of federal, state, local coordination, which was one of the hallmarks of DHS in its early days. So, and it's all driven by this notion that somehow we can rid the United States of 10 million people without anybody noticing. And that just ain't going to happen.
Well, it's always hard to analyze anything he and this administration do, because it's become abundantly clear that regardless of what the subject is, there's no core philosophy. There's no long-term strategic planning that took place. Like, to me, everything regarding his immigration policies is designed as red meat for the MAGA base, which is founded on race. So that's why we have the court helping him now to racially profile in places like LA, which is why he doesn't have a problem with white South Africans coming to this country. Like, immigration is fine, apparently, to Donald Trump, as long as it comes from the right countries and people are of the right colors. But I do agree with you that this is not what they voted for. They were told that he's going to go after the criminals. And clearly that's not happening. And we see it night after night on the news. People come home from work and they're watching mothers being ripped apart from their children. And so where does this go?
And not only is it not limited to criminals, but because he has redeployed so much of other federal law enforcement to help with this immigration push, other crimes, serious crimes, are going investigated and unprosecuted. I saw a number the other day that shocked me, that a quarter to a third of FBI field agents are now doing immigration work. That's not what the FBI is designed to do. They're supposed to do big conspiracy investigations. They're supposed to do white-collar crime. They're supposed to be doing serious human trafficking and cases and other types of matters that have a broad impact across the United States. They're not supposed to be going with ICE agents picking up a flower vendor or a tamale seller. So, and you see that ATF, which is supposed to do arms trafficking, they've been redeployed. U.S. attorneys' offices, the federal prosecutors that do 80-90% of the federal criminal prosecutions are now all doing immigration cases. It's not. It's the opposite of trying to handle crime at the federal level in a responsible and effective way.
Well, to your point, we have cyber crimes, cyber attacks. We have AI-driven disinformation, ransomware, and other 21st century technology threats to our national and homeland security. How vulnerable are we now when so much of our resources is being redirected for this ICE performance?
Time will tell. But as someone who spent years evaluating risk and to the United States, I would say that we are not only not safer than we were under prior administrations, and I mean both Democratic and Republican administrations, we're actually less safe.
This is the scary part, and it's important for people to understand, because on 9/11, when almost 3,000 people perished in the Twin Towers, the people working in those buildings were Republicans, independents, and Democrats. So it's chilling to hear someone with your background and your expertise tell us all that something awful can happen tomorrow, a month from now, 6 months from now, because we're not prepared, which is what happened on 9/11. We were unprepared. We were asleep at the wheel. We learned pretty quickly, but there was a lot of human suffering and carnage in order to get there. It is kind of chilling to think that the people who are charged with the responsibility of protecting us have no idea what they're doing, and we are not safe.
You know, I hate to say it that way, but I have grave concern. And it begins with, just even looking at who the president has in key security related roles in his administration. The head of the FBI, he's not qualified to be the head of the FBI. He's a showboat. The head of the Department of Homeland Security, no comment. I mean, I just can't.
I was going to ask you about her.
Yeah. The head of the Director of National Intelligence, Gabbard, is ridiculous, and is known to kind of twist intelligence to meet a political agenda versus what intelligence is supposed to give the president, which is this is what we know, this is what we don't know, these are the risks associated with what we don't know, these are the risks associated with what we do know here, and even if it doesn't meet what the president believes, these are the facts as we know them. Instead, kind of twisting them around so that the quote facts meet what she believes to be what the president desires to hear. That's a very dangerous situation.
See, this is the part I don't understand. These people all have their own lives, their own families, their own children. Don't they care? Do you think it's just hubris or willful ignorance or denial that we don't have to worry about this stuff? Domestic terrorism, cyber attacks, our enemies who are not asleep at the wheel, they're watching, right?
I don't know. I don't know. You're getting into psychology
right.
that I far beyond my expertise. I would say that my perception is that the people that the president has around him all were selected because they would feed the president and agree to whatever he wanted, whatever he said, and then that they would then spend their efforts not trying to interpret what's best for the American people, but what is President Trump, what does he want to hear? That's what I'm going to give him.
Yeah. So the Department of Homeland Security was created after 9/11 to protect us Americans from external threats, global threats. Over the years, do you think there's been enough of a shift in focus towards internal threats such as domestic terrorism, election interference, political violence?
So threats evolve. They're not static. Mm-hmm. When I became the secretary in 2009, aviation security was still the number one threat vector. And we speculated that was because foreign terrorist groups viewed 9/11 as kind of a gold standard, as kind of sick as that is. But then, that's why. And we were dealing with a lot of aviation security. I spent maybe 10% of my time on cybersecurity. By the time I left almost 5 years later, I was spending 40% of my time on cybersecurity. So the point is that threats change and the threat landscape changes. we did see the rise of domestic groups that were not just espousing political violence and violence against their fellow citizens, but trying to actively plan and for that. I think that has grown over time, and I think one of the problems with the current administration is that they totally downplayed those kinds of investigations and efforts, both at the FBI and at DHS. In fact, the unit at the Department of Homeland Security that collected intelligence and did analysis on these groups has been totally disbanded. So they don't even exist anymore. The focus is on Antifa, which my understanding is it's not a group, it's an ideology, and it's a word that scares people. But to be sure, there are far left activists who have committed violent crimes. I will not say that hasn't happened. What we saw was that was one small section of the growth, but by and large, the larger section was from the far right.
Yeah, well, that certainly doesn't match up, of course, to the rhetoric that comes out of the White House and in the right-wing media ecosystem. But do you think we're more vulnerable now from internal threats than we are from external threats?
That's hard to say. I think we're vulnerable on both.
Mm-hmm. What do you see as our biggest threats? Let me put it that way.
I don't rack and stack them that way, mm-hmm. but I would put cyber up there. Mm-hmm. I would put information security up there. Mm-hmm. I would put nuclear proliferation up there. But a lot of countries around the world trying to get nuclear capability. But there are so many threats and risks that what you have to do is you have to collect as good information as you can. You have to make judgments as best you can. You have to deploy your resources as effectively as you can. And then you have to be prepared to respond and to recover quickly.
So we've talked about the diversion of resources towards immigration, and you touched on this much earlier in our conversation about Trump's autocratic overreach, his weaponization of the Department of Justice. To the average person at home, it just seems like the Justice Department, the FBI are spending a lot of time with a list that he's literally telegraphing every time he's on television of who he doesn't like and who he wants the law enforcement agencies to go after. When you take that and combine it with what we've been talking about, it just seems like a mind-boggling dereliction of duty in terms of utilizing and using the resources of the United States government effectively.
It's more than a declaration of duty. It's really an abuse of the office, and it's an abuse of the powers that the president has. And I hear all the time, well, the Justice Department, they're just doing to these other people what they did to Trump. And nobody backs up and says, well, wait a minute. Let's really look at what happened to President Trump. First, it was a special counsel that was appointed. It wasn't run by Attorney General Garland. And they went, if anything, too slowly and too carefully. This is on the January 6th investigation. And we all saw what we saw on January 6th. And we all mm-hmm. heard what we heard on January 6th. This was not some penny ante case of alleged mortgage fraud. This was a real effort to overthrow a legitimate presidential election. And on the Mar-a-Lago case, forgive me, but I've dealt with classified information for years. For it to be just secreted at Mar-a-Lago, kind of loosely, whatever. And then when the president is asked repeatedly to return it, he returns some, he keeps others, and then they finally have to do a subpoena. And they still know that there's more stuff down at Mar-a-Lago that he has. So they're finally forced to do a search warrant. It's not just the fact that he took the stuff; it's the fact that he wouldn't give it back. That I think prompted the federal investigation. And if you hadn't had a crazy judge who said that special counsel the role was unconstitutional, which I think she's just plain wrong on the law. That to me was the simpler and easier case. The point being that both of those cases had serious factual predicates that any serious prosecutor would say, we need to look at this and we need to make judgments about whether charges should be filed and whether there should be a prosecution, etc. That is a far cry from let's say President Biden in the White House had been caught on an email directing the Attorney General, I want you to investigate Trump and I want you to investigate, 2 or 3 other people who work for Trump because these are bad people. That's just not what happened there. So this whataboutism, well, what about what they did to Trump? Well, what they did to Trump was to try to do a very professional job, as isolated from the White House as one can possibly be in terms of adjudicating his guilt or his innocence. Now, what we see now is a total perversion of the justice system, where the president is actually by name telling them who to investigate, and then bringing, at least with Comey and James, seem to be cases that no real federal prosecutor would bring.
History, I'm a student of history. I love history. History often teaches us a lot of things, but it also not only repeats itself, but it often surprises us. But you look at someone like Nixon, we had to find tapes in order to understand who his targets were, right? And here we have the United States president literally sitting in the Oval Office, aside his FBI director and his attorney general, and saying, here are my enemies, go after them. And that's just become normal.
Yeah. And here's what I worry about, which is that people will normalize it and think, well, this is the way it's supposed to be. It's not the way it's supposed to be. And living in a government where an elected president can dictate who gets investigated, who gets charged, et cetera, that is a scary, scary thought. Because even for people who ultimately don't get charged, being under federal investigation is not a benign process. It's stressful, it's expensive, it's really interferes with one's life. I know this because, like I said, I was a U.S. attorney. I initiated investigations, and we had kind of the standard we had to meet before we would even start an investigation, much less bring charges.
Well, let's stick with that for a second, because we've seen how U.S. attorneys, the latest one is Kelly Hayes, she is now telling Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche that there's no there when it comes to Adam Schiff. She doesn't have enough for an indictment. She certainly doesn't have enough for a conviction. And if history does repeat itself, she will likely soon be out of a job. There will be somebody else who is able to put aside ethics or morals or whatever and walk into a courtroom and hand over charges. As a former U.S. attorney, when you see this kind of thing happening, a complete erosion in just the respect for the office, the respect for the rule of law, for our judicial system, I can't imagine how that makes you feel.
Oh, it's terrible. It's a terrible feeling to watch what's going on. And the U.S. attorneys, which is one of the little understood but most important roles in the federal government, these are the chief federal prosecutors in the districts around the country who handle 90% plus of the criminal prosecutions in the United States brought by the U.S. government. It's a very important role. And that's why it has to be presidentially appointed and Senate confirmed. And what we're seeing now is they're doing every which way to get around those requirements. They're nominating people who can't get confirmed, who aren't qualified to be confirmed, putting them in as interims. Now, the way it's supposed to work is an interim can serve 120 days. Mm-hmm. And then if there's nobody confirmed by that point, then the judges of the federal district appoint someone, typically the first assistant, who's a career official, to fill the role until somebody is actually confirmed. Well, they've done all kinds of dances around that requirement. They've done it in the Eastern District of Virginia. They've done it in New Jersey. They've done it in Nevada. They've done it in Los Angeles. And it's just one more sign of how many fingers the Trump administration has in the kind of pie that made up the norms and laws that govern the justice system.
Well, to your point, Lindsay Halligan, who handed up the charges on James Comey and Tish James, but the defense is now saying she's not a legit U.S. attorney. Do you think that defense will hold, that the cases could be tossed?
Yeah, and that's an interesting issue. So the Court of Appeals that has New Jersey in its jurisdiction has that issue before it right now. And I understand that when they had oral argument, the judges, and some were appointed by Republicans, I think 2 were appointed by Republicans, 1 by a Democrat, were very critical or questioning of what the government was doing here. So we may have to wait to see what's called the Third Circuit does. But in the Comey situation, so the first question is, can the U.S. attorney serve under these unusual circumstances? That's the first question. The second question is, can a defendant have a case dismissed if the U.S. attorney was inappropriately in office? That's a more complicated question. But in the case of Comey, the Trump's lawyer, who was thrown in there to be the U.S. attorney at the last minute, right before the statute of limitations were to expire, she's the only one on the indictment. She's the only signature on the indictment. She was the only one who presented it to the grand jury. She's the only person who handled the case. And so the argument is, not only was she inappropriately appointed, but since she's the only person in the office who handled the indictment has to fail. We shall see.
Well, the interesting thing about the Comey case is that if for Comey in a perfect world, the case gets tossed, the statute of limitations is passed for him. So the charges can't be brought again because
they
clock
may
is
try
run
to
out.
Well, maybe Comey can make a claim to the Justice Department to pay for his attorney's fees.
That would be a great what goes around comes around story, wouldn't it? When we look at Donald Trump's deployment of National Guard troops around the country, much of the coverage, much of the anger that we Americans have is about what it's been doing to us, what it's been doing to undocumented immigrants that you were talking about, people who have been rooted in their communities for years. But we don't hear a lot about the guardsmen themselves. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, if these troops are being deployed, and I'm being generous, because I'd actually rather say used and abused and exploited for political reasons rather than legitimate security reasons, what kind of strain do you think that's creating on readiness, morale, and command structure?
Yeah, so again, I used to be a governor, in Arizona. I had a National Guard. And I think people need to understand members of the National Guard are basically civilians who do guard work on the side. They do a weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. Most of those efforts are devoted to training, but when they're used, they do disaster response. They help with evacuations, and they can serve as a reserve force for U.S. Active duty military abroad. So, for example, when I was governor, we had units in Afghanistan, but we also used them in forest fires and floods, and in all of those, which were considered kind of their central missions. The members of the Guard are they have that morale that they're serving the public good. The unfortunate thing with this use of the Guard going into cities where the governors have opposed their federalization, where the mayors don't want them, where there's been no kind of pre-planning to even coordinate with local law enforcement, et cetera. And then they're meeting protests. That's not what they're not there to kind of be adversarial to their own countrymen. And so I have to think that's a morale killer. And the second thing is over deployment of the Guard. If you have guards sitting in Los Angeles for months at a time, well, those guys are not going to be available the next time you have to do a big evacuation for a forest fire or a flood, earthquake. So there's the overuse of the Guard. So there you have the morale issue, you have just the overuse of the Guard issue. It's a terrible precedent for the president to set.
Yeah, well, it's wrong and inappropriate on so many levels. I want to ask you about last week's No Kings protests. There were around 2,600 of them nationwide. Estimates had the attendance up around 7 million. People were marching against Trump's autocratic overreach. But Trump, Speaker Mike Johnson, and other Republicans called it a, quote, hate America rally, called the protesters, quote, pro-Hamas, Marxists, communists, and, as you mentioned before, Antifa people. How dangerous is this rhetoric when it's used and directed against citizens merely for exercising their First Amendment rights?
Oh, it was ridiculous. I mean, they were so over the top, I almost had to laugh. I mean, we could see what we saw. You had people in different costumes. You had great signs. I mean, really clever signs.
Awesome signs.
You had people of all ages and races. There were virtually no arrests at any of the No Kings Day protests. I mean, it was a pure First Amendment expression. They just look silly and ridiculous and out of touch. And I'll tell you, getting 7 million people to go out on a Saturday afternoon, that tells you something's happening out there. People are not happy. They know something is not right. They may not be able to put their exact finger on it. They may not be able to articulate it with precision, but they know that something is not ringing right here. And I suspect that the No Kings movement will only continue to grow.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. So far, we've seen the lower courts do a pretty solid job of serving as a critical check on Trump's autocratic actions. But with many of those cases, we know the ultimate adjudication will rest with the United States Supreme Court. Do you have confidence in the highest court to ultimately uphold the Constitution?
No. And the reason I lost and I say this, I'm an officer of the court. I'm a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And I generally hold courts in the highest esteem. But the way the U.S. Supreme Court handled its docket these last months, to me, is so wrong, issuing these kind of 1 or 2 line orders on the so-called shadow docket, not giving any legal reasoning, just saying, no, he can fire these people. No, he can impound this money. No, he can deport these people. With no law explanation, they're acting like an arm of the White House as opposed to a legal institution that's supposed to give us what their legal reasoning is. Mm-hmm. And we don't have that. And more importantly, the lower courts don't have that. They're left to guess what the Supreme Court wants them to do. So it's not a good situation. And I haven't seen anything like it in my entire career.
Yeah. Well, we have almost 3.5 years left of Trump 2.0, which when you just hear yourself say that, you want to go get a drink. We have a critical midterm election coming up next year, the next presidential election 2 years after that. Given the speed with which Trump is dismantling institution after institution with the help of congressional Republicans, how confident are you that not only can our democracy survive this onslaught, but that we will be able to one day rebuild trust in government, trust in the media, in science, and other institutions?
I don't know. I mean, I actually, my great hope is that the American people over our history has been a very resilient people. Mm-hmm. And we've gone through terrible periods mm-hmm. before, and have come out of them, if anything, stronger. But this is so broad, and it's different in a way, because in the past we didn't have social media to kind of exacerbate all the divisions within our society and et cetera. So where trust is concerned, once you lose trust, it takes a long time to rebuild it. And then what kind of a country do we have if people don't trust? If people don't trust that the president has their interests in top of mind as opposed to his own? What happens if people don't trust that the rule of law is actually being applied in a neutral way? What happens if people don't trust facts and instead go to whatever source they think gives them facts? What happens if people lose their faith in science? Because science has undergirded so much of the U.S. economy and our progress, particularly since World War II. We don't know the answers to those questions. I do know, though, that, and I think the No Kings rallies on Saturday evidence this, that there's a lot of Americans who share these concerns.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. My last question. You've served in so many different highly distinguished, high-level, hard-to-obtain positions. Do you have a favorite?
I get asked that all the time. No, I've been a U.S. attorney, an attorney general, a governor, a cabinet secretary, president of the University of California, all of them challenging, all of them with a great mission, all of them hard. And each of them, I got some good things done, and each of them I made some mistakes. Each of them I learned something different about really the breadth and depth of our society. So I won't rack and stack them. They were each worthy in their own way.
You sound like a parent being asked if you have a favorite kid.
In a way, that's exactly what it's like.
Janet, thank you for a great conversation. Really appreciate it, and hope you'll come back and chat with us again.
All right, you take care.
All righty, bye-bye. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhinecliff, with additional editing by Maddie Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Langell. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Back Room with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.